The great cephalopods Udra and Wu are some of the most spectacular new additions to the world of Monster Hunter, with their mix of cunning, power, and dexterity making them both top predators and lethal opponents. But how do they also fit into their unique biomes, compare to normal octopi, and what could be an explanation for some of the more mysterious behaviours? Let's find out. Obviously, the first thing about Udra and Wu is that they both live on land, when cephalopods are universally known for living in the sea. And this seems to be the case in Monster Hunter with their other cephalopods. The species seen in wilds resemble Nautilus and live underwater like a normie. Whatever changes happened to the giant monstrous cephalopods likely did so over millennia, and with a healthy dose of various fictional abilities. But what could be the initial evolutionary prompts for cephalopods to come onto land in the first place? It is likely to be a lot of traits all coinciding, but to get the ball rolling on the discussion, an early one for the specific cephalopod monsters we've seen so far could be size. It's unknown whether the terrestrial cephalopods went small big land, or small land big, but personally I would suggest the former. Cephalopod size is suggested to be limited by predation, so the common ancestor would find limited success and opportunities for radiation if it just came on land to start getting eaten by a different cast of predators. Similarly, typical cephalopod defences like ink would be less effective outside of a fluid medium. Whilst there's still large and impressive oceanic predators present in the known world, the coastal environment doesn't seem as competitive or predator-filled as a terrestrial one. So the common ancestor would essentially need to come out of the water reasonably ready to start swinging. Not all octopi are voracious predators, but with the predatory species, as they get larger, their activity rates also rise, with them becoming more active predators and animals overall, and less sluggish bottom dwellers. So it's likely Udra and Wu's distant ancestors were already large, fully fledged coastal predators, ready to step onto land and contest the wyverns, rather than the presumably more difficult size radiation from a small size after making it on land. In not just our world, but our current geological epoch, size in cephalopods is also typically correlated with a preference for deep depths in colder, high-latitude waters. But this wasn't always the case, and the western interior seaway of the late Cretaceous had multiple large cephalopods of giant squid size, likely serving as both predator and prey. It suggested that our modern cephalopods prefer the more oxygen-saturated waters and more productive seas that come with a colder climate that also facilitates thermoregulatory processes at larger body sizes. But not everyone obeys this trend, and some large and predatory species like Humboldt or jumbo squid will grow to large sizes in more tropical waters. But warmer waters are less oxygen soluble, and this would wind up providing a problem for more massive cephalopod predators. It's not unheard of for aquatic life to start breathing air, and such species will often do so in tidal or seasonally restrictive environments, presumably chiefly in response to oxygen starvation. The ancestral transitional cephalopod may have developed air breathing in response to warm, oxygen-starved tropical waters it lived in. Another possible way to get around this is taking in oxygen via the skin, with some cephalopods getting almost half their necessary oxygen by doing so, with the skin barrier being a major organ for water and ionic regulation too as well. But in a coastal environment this can be a risk, due to what else you might take in as well. Octopi and other cephalopods are limited to salt water, as trying to move to freshwater causes fatal organ edema and cells bursting due to octopi not having mechanisms to move excess freshwater back out of their bodies. Indeed, many saltwater invertebrates share similar issues. Storms and heavy rainfall can actually cause die-offs in octopi in coastal areas. As the freshwater runoff is so great, it changes the salinity in the immediate vicinity of the coast, with fatal consequences for the octopi living there. If we assume the ancestral cephalopod was a coastal species, and we have to, or else how did it get onto land, it may have developed a much tougher, less permeable hide to better withstand freshwater runoff from the land. It may have also focused foraging in the more productive waters around river mouths and estuarine areas, rather than the less productive tropical waters, and so it would need these same features to survive the less saline waters too. This, in turn, would likely mean that ancestral cephalopod had to forsake skin oxygen intake entirely, and became a completely air-breathing cephalopod like New Udra and Shei Wu. Through surface dependency and buoyancy among other factors, this may have then limited underwater foraging and movement, but would have permitted even more terrestrial foraging and movement instead. This is already a pretty common behaviour in coastal octopi species, though one that's poorly understood due to a lack of direct research. But there's plenty footage of octopi foraging in tide pools, and even on land too. All these factors combined would cause a snowballing series of ecological factors, prompting a large predator cephalopod to begin full-time life on land. The ancestor was already large and an active predator. Warm coastal waters and estuarine runoff facilitated air breathing, then leading to greater amounts of time that could be spent foraging on land and taking advantage of tidal and terrestrial resources. The stage was then set for terrestrial cephalopod radiation on land. It's worth noting that they didn't get it all their own way though. Right now, cephalopods are restricted to the Eastlands, and there may be various ecological reasons for this. Plus, the world of Monster Hunter isn't exactly the future is wild. Still with a majority mammal, reptile and arthropod biomass in most ecosystems rather than endless giant cephalopods. So whilst these anomalous beasts are top-order predators in their respective ecosystems, they're still pretty unique in the world of Monster Hunter. Whilst Shei Wu has deviated notably from other cephalopods, New Udra essentially does resemble a large and demonic octopus. Noticeable signature traits seen in it that differ from normal cephalopods include the reduction of suckers on the limbs and the movement of the beak. Their spiked tentacles instead may be an adaptation to mass and terrestrial living, their clusters of spikes being concentrated mainly at the tentacle tips, possibly to hook into the ground and pull the animal along, rather than using the length of the limb for traction too, as cephalopods do in water. The beak has likely moved forward for ease of eating outside of a watery environment, which may be a more cumbersome task for the huge New Udra to maneuver itself over its food. A trait shared with real octopi is the siphon, from which New Udra will blast fire at its opposition. This is likely adapted from ink sacs, and similar behaviour in cephalopods. Ink in cephalopods is essentially melanin and mucus, with the combination varying depending on what's being achieved. A large smokescreen blast is primarily melanin, whereas decoy structures are partially shaped with the mucus, to provide a figure that looks like another prey item to distract the predator. As said, both of these are dependent on a fluid medium to properly work, and initially New Udra ancestors could have just blasted ink or some other foul substance to blind or tar attackers. The actual New Udra itself uses oil mucus, an oil composite for its own fire blast, which is presumably a lot cheaper to produce, as it can partially consume the fuel from its environment, and likely does on occasion when hunting small prey like Geladron. New Udra has kept and modified the mucus aspect to it though, and from the carved description it seems the mucus itself has some flammable potential, which may have been its initial use before being combined with the oil silt on ancestral New Udra's arrival to the basin. With New Udra being a top predator in its own environment, and described as essentially being the ruler of the Oilwell Basin, as healthy adults they have considerably less need for such defensive measures, and so the ink gland and siphon are rather refashioned as weapons, to deal with irritating competitors, with New Udra giving Ajarakan a similar treatment to the hunter that gets in its way too. It may also anoint itself with this substance to better make it stick to its own hide, as New Udra's oil is a carvable item and said to be a flammable combination itself, as well as igniting this when enraged to both embellish physical attacks and fling flaming projectiles. It also seems to keep a general coating of oil mucus too. New Udra's hide is thick and fireproof as one would expect, but it does also seem to glisten, and is described as slimy even when cleaned, and so may have some slight level of permeability that the oil mucus functions as an extra shield against. It may also function as a general skin shield too, and be useful to balm and seal any wounds New Udra takes in its daily life. On top of this, it also likely provides a lubricant, as New Udra slips around the crevasses in the basin too. Surprisingly, despite its dry appearance, Shei Wu is described as having a mucus-laden hide too, and whilst it obviously uses such a substance to create its blades, it would seem it's a body-wide secretion. Shei Wu's uses are less clear, but wound coverage and lubrication would also fit for it as well, considering frequent conflict with the Guardians, and also using small cracks in the ruins to slip around in. A rarity of both monsters is that their eggs and young can be seen in the game. Both cephalopods will lay eggs in their respective nests, and these can even be seen to hatch into Shei-Yo and Nu-Yeya, the terms for the baby cephalopods. Nu-Udra seems to lay its eggs directly beneath the Everforge, with the egg strands hanging from it, and will only seemingly appear in the fire spring, and then especially in the very strong fire springs too. Unlike the other apexes, which are seen with reasonable frequency in the inclemencies of their environments, Nu-Udra is very rarely seen by the people of Azuz, and isn't a common presence in the higher regions of the basin, with the one being slain by the hunter in Wild's story being the first sighting for some time. With this, it does seem that Nu-Udra at least partially relies on the heat of the fire spring to incubate its eggs. Presumably there are other sources of heat it will use in weaker years, and for Nu-Udra in the other parts of their range, such as areas of geothermal activity in the lower areas of the basin. As it's mentioned, there are occasional glimpses of Nu-Yeya. Whilst Nu-Udra don't defend their eggs quite as devoutly as real octopi, they will rest next to them, and be present in the fire spring for at least some of the brooding period. Nu-Udra may tend them more passively, less by directly maintaining the eggs, and more by protection and cleaning the area of potential predators. This likely explains the interactions between Ajarakan and Nu-Udra, where the latter will attack and predate the former, showing itself quite capable of taking on even a group of them. In its cutscene, Nu-Udra even seemed to be specifically seeking the Ajarakan troop out, with intent to neutralize. And whilst the elevated egg ropes are presumably sufficient to keep most ground-bound thieves away, Ajarakan may be pursued with such hostility as their mobility makes them a potent and frequent nest raider. Nu-Udra probably isn't too picky either, and it seems the final Ajarakan it did intend to eat as well as it dragged it away. This in turn may explain Ajarakan's behaviour in the fire spring itself. It's said they form groups in this period, and most likely for greater vigilance in detecting Nu-Udra when it surfaces to breed. Shei-Wu in comparison doesn't seem to be anywhere near as strict with its seasonal breeding, with the ceiling of its lair being lit by its bioluminescent eggs. Presumably, the differences stem from Shei-Wu not needing as much heat for its eggs for one reason or another, and overall the ruins of Wyveria generally being a much less seasonal area as a set of ancient ruins. Though the eggs do still only hatch in the plenty. Why is unknown, as the Shei-Yo are kept fed by the remaining yolk from the eggs, as they presumably disperse through the hollow. So offspring provisioning doesn't seem to be the answer. One theory could be that they feed on the fresh cocoons after the Guardians have hatched to jumpstart their growth. With Guardians not needing to eat, and the Shei-Yo presumably being too small to warrant hostile attention, Shei-Wu's nest eggs may be a factor of convenience for them over any real protective or provisioning element. They may simply be laid as that's where Shei-Wu spends most of its time when not actively hunting. One thing a lot may wonder is if Nu-Udra and Shei-Wu are semiparous, or if they breed once and then die. This is something most actual cephalopods do, and contrary to popular belief, in octopi at least it's not the devotion of the mother refusing to leave her eggs that kills her, but rather a switch in the optic glands that controls both senescence and parental behaviour in octopi. Remove it, and the octopi don't undergo senescence as quickly, but also don't tend their eggs. The males also undergo senescence and die after mating too, but this is unlikely in the two cephalopods. It's not entirely certain why octopi undergo senescence, but it's most likely to be from two reasons. The older theory suggested of preventing population booms that would reduce fitness, and that, due to losing the shells and hard mantles seen in Nautilus and prehistoric cephalopods, predation rates were so high there was no functional reason to survive past a few years, as they'd not make it that far without getting eaten anyway. Both Monster Hunter cephalopods are large, powerful, and well armed enough that they presumably face minimal predation, giving more evolutionary flexibility for lifespan, and thus letting them afford longer, slower life histories. This in turn allows for them to become heteroparous, and breed multiple times in a lifespan. This would likely be necessary at such large sizes too. The eggs of both cephalopods are several times larger than the largest real cephalopod eggs. But then the actual monsters themselves, and especially new Udra, are several dozen times larger than the largest real cephalopods. The sheer growth time needed for the tiny hatchlings to get to adult size would almost certainly allow for multiple clutches of eggs across a longer lifespan for both adult monsters. On top of this, the young, who ostensibly consume different resources to the adults, will take so long in reaching adulthood, and presumably with such low success, that there won't be the risk of a population boom, and dozens of adult cephalopods all using the same resources in just a few years. It's possible the cephalopods may stack things even further with something of a staggered spawning. New Yaya will hatch continuously through the plenty, rather than in a single burst. And with the mothers combined in active presence in the fire spring, it's possible that new Udra undergo prolonged spawning like some real octopi, where they spawn continuously while still feeding and breeding. This allows for both more young, and possibly for the young to be less overwhelming on whatever resources they consume too. In both cases, the environment may also encourage a slower life history. The largest cephalopods alive today live in waters with noticeable oscillations in productivity that encourage a slower growth rate and greater longevity. The Oilwell Basin isn't so different, with the fallow being a relatively barren period before the plenty, and these fluctuations in resources may encourage similarly slow life history in new Udra. Things are less clear with Shewu, but guardians may also represent something of an irregular resource, as it's uncertain how and what frequency they're produced at. A lot of the adaptations seen in both cephalopods are likely rather reductions that came when they were released from the pressure of high predation. Their vision may be another such example. Even the largest cephalopods with the slowest life histories still have huge eyes with excellent vision, believed to be to help them spot descending sperm whales as they agitate the bioluminescent organisms in their dives, which is a really cool image, as even colossal squid are still very vulnerable to cetacean attack, whereas new Udra has canonically poor vision, hence why flash bombs don't work on it, and Shewu doesn't even have visible eyes. For both, these are likely features of living in the competitive lap of luxury as dominant predators in their respective ecosystems, but also from their subterranean lifestyles. Shewu lives in underground ruins, whereas new Udra prefers the lower levels of the basin, and perhaps more like terrestrial cave fauna, rather than deep-sea life, they've undergone reductions to their eyes and vision. Whilst both only have to worry about minimal threats to their lives, vision is still just generally useful to hunt and find your way around with, and to a degree, the two may also see through their skin. Some real cephalopods have photoreceptors in their skin, and so can tell when they're in contact with light. Whilst these cephalopods still have eyes they use for vision, and these photoreceptors are seemingly more used for chromatophores, it's possible they may transmit outside information to the nervous system, and a more advanced version could be how the Shewu especially can see without eyes. New Udra has a much more advanced version of this on the tips of its limbs, known as oculi, which the guild suggests may be sensory organs, and Takuda confirmed in an interview. They seemingly work in conjunction with the eyes, to take in as much light or visual stimuli as possible. This may also be the reason for bioluminescence in new Udra too. Whilst some cephalopods do use bioluminescence to seemingly lure prey, or disguise their own approach, new Udra's range of prey includes opponents too intelligent or wary to fall for it. Even real giant cephalopods will have bioluminescence around the eyes, but it's similarly unclear what it's for. One suggestion is that in dark environments it could help locate prey, which could work for new Udra too. As with other weird and unexplained features, intraspecific communication is always a fair suggestion too. In terms of other bizarre bodily features, it's similarly unknown what exactly Shewu's beard does, or is for, but a sensory organ is also a fair suggestion. It's unknown which sense exactly, but the fact Shewu seems to prefer to have it facing a target would indicate it has some form of detection role. With the arms of both cephalopods likely doubling as extensive sensory organs, touch is ostensibly an important factor, and real octopi have extensive nerves and specific ganglia in the arms for better motor control of these unique body parts. This touch may also facilitate other senses too. And one interesting quest with Shei-Wu seems to reveal that the keeper's clothing may well have caused a predatory attack. Such clothing is designed to resemble the cocoons to protect them from guardian attack, and the keepers will also hide in the cocoons when caught short out in the ruins. Cephalopods can actually taste through their tentacles as well, with chemoreceptors equipped to tell them different factors about certain molecules of their prey. Certain materials, or perhaps more crucially hiding in a cocoon, and thus getting certain substances on your clothing, may well cause Shei-Wu to readily take humans, much as they will any guardian, when they tick the ideal prey boxes of alive and somewhat guardian flavoured. As well as being swift, strong and agile, both cephalopods are likely pretty cunning, as some members of their family often are. Shei-Wu may be especially so, with its tool use in creating the mucus blades. Shei-Wu's blades are something of a grey area in this regard by some definitions, which state the tool can't be part of the animal itself, and this is mostly fulfilled in that it's a temporary hardened secretion that isn't permanent and is only made for specific tasks, although it is still created by Shei-Wu itself. I think the argument that Shei-Wu doesn't have the blades just hanging there waiting for use, it has to consciously make them itself and decide which variation to go for, is an argument for them being tools. The why of it may be the same reason as to why some other cephalopods will use tools too, to do something their bodies can't otherwise. One form in real cephalopods is shelter or armour, which is done due to the high rates of predation stemming from the lack of shell as discussed. For Shei-Wu, they presumably arose due to a lack of weaponry. Whilst both cephalopods are strong and dexterous, New Udra is enormous, far larger and more physically powerful than Shei-Wu, as well as having a large, strong beak that's presumably well adapted to crunch through the shells of other monsters as the arms hold them steady. Shei-Wu's efforts to simply try and eat their prey alive may be successful sometimes, but for the more formidable guardians, the blades are presumably made to overcome its lack of bulk and raw weaponry like a more typical beak. And when used, the blades are devastatingly effective. In combat with both hunters and other monsters, Shei-Wu will swap between various forms depending on the task at hand, making both hooks and darts as well as the spear-like blades. This allows Shei-Wu to be multiple weapons at once, and a living Swiss Army knife, becoming a significantly greater combatant. The blades are ostensibly very sharp from their performance, and as well as being quite long, the slender tentacle may make them more lethal too. Many other monsters' weapons are limited by their length before reaching the hard part of their owner, whereas Shei-Wu can essentially drive them straight through an opponent in a single well-placed strike. This devastating opening from ambush is likely how it softens up its guardian prey for devouring. Shei-Wu's preference for eating guardians is a curious one, and hard to explain, as so little is known about Shei-Wu in general. From what we do see, Shei-Wu just consume prey whole like a brittle star, lunging on top of the food item dead or alive, and rapidly consuming it. The fanged tentacles of its massive mouth/limb combination presumably prevent escape rather than process food prior to chemical digestion. Consumption appears rapid, and may contain starfish-like elements of partial stomach, or perhaps more likely stomach acid, regurgitation to rapidly break down prey into easier to digest parts internally. Whilst Shei-Wu at least seems to consume an entire odogaron in near entirety, the conditions of its lair suggest this isn't the average, and that Shei-Wu more typically consumes the softer parts of the victim and leaves the intact bones still partially articulated. Part of this may come from the fact Shei-Wu also seems to have a very small mantle/body area that presumably doesn't have an especially large stomach capacity either, even if we assume the stomach partially extends into the arms like a starfish, which may or may not be the case. It's also these morphological factors that may result in Shei-Wu being a guardian eater too. With comparatively little room for food, Shei-Wu may instead opt for very high quality and energy dense food that it can break down slowly over time. This is one such adaptation often seen in cave-living organisms. Shei-Wu may eat one large guardian at relatively irregular intervals when one hatches, and keep itself going with guardian sacreds and the occasional human or tempered monster in the meantime too. And that may be all very well and good, but at the same time one may wonder where exactly Shei-Wu came from, especially if their ecology already seems so dependent on anthropogenic sources, and it doesn't seem hugely likely that the people of Wyveria were especially content to let them eat their bioweapons. And maybe Shaywu aren't picky with what powered-up monsters they eat. We can tentatively lump a lot of monsters, guardians, some subspecies and variants, and World's definition of tempered monsters, as enriched monsters. In World and its book, it's mentioned the latter two are created by a surplus of bioenergy. Whether this is just trophic bioaccumulation from a richer environment, or if some wyverns and monsters have some radiotrophic ability to absorb energy, is unknown, which leads to them being enriched in terms of their own levels of energy. Such enrichment seems to occur in certain places of high geothermal activity and energetic potential, like the Elder's Recess and other lands adjacent to the Everstream. If we cautiously assume that Shaywu normally live underground with a broad distribution, where a lot goes on that we're clearly not aware of, then they may crawl up from cracks in the earth at certain weak points in the mantle to become resident in such areas, and feed on the enriched monsters formed there. For Shaywu, there may be no difference between a bioenergy-enriched monster and a guardian, or even freak incidents like Rise's apex monsters. All of its guardian-eating talents can be applied as easily to their base forms, who are arguably less formidable most of the time, and such talents would also allow Shaywu to challenge sub-elder monsters with intent to eat as well. Some may naturally ask, well, why don't we see any Shaywu in the recess then? But it may be as simple as the fact we just didn't bump into any, as the recess is a massive area, also intended to be filled with more than just the roster seen in-game. It could also be possible that certain energy signatures given off by Xeno'jiiva caused a partial retreat, so they could avoid it when it woke up. Any form of very strong or sustained energy pulse may be sufficient to earn Shaywu's interest, and cause scouting missions to the surface, where they search for enriched monsters and start to breed upon finding them, or lie in wait by such energy sources for monsters to either arrive or be formed. If this is the case, some may question Shaywu's distribution, but as said, they do seem to have a lot of features that you would expect for something that lives underground, as well as this matching the habitat of the ruins too. The question of what they eat underground is anyone's guess. As said, it's an environment we generally know little about. But one thing that does seem to be the case is that some elders can be associated with such subterranean environments too. The deceased bodies of large elders, as well as their eggs and/or juvenile forms, however they reproduce, could be Shaywu's main form of sustenance, along with supplementing its diet with other troglobionts too, which may be one of the factors causing Shaywu to prefer such energy-rich foods. It's worth noting too, Wyveria isn't the only ruins we see in the game as well. Past titles have often had glimpses of civilizations past, but none more so than the Tower, clearly the crown jewel of an ancient civilization. There's also something obviously going on there. Elders and certain other high-powered monsters are clearly attracted to it for unknown reasons, species usually associated with enrichment areas previously mentioned. Advanced civilizations past needed power, and we now see such sources in the Dragon Torch of Wyveria. Maybe the Tower, and other equally grandiose ruins if they exist, have similar power devices that attract certain monsters, much as the Recess and Everstream do, and in doing so attract Shaywu as well. They may be as at home in another set of ruins as they were in Wyveria, and such places are often held in high regard by hunting bodies. Even if the Tower remains fairly minimally explored in the series, as the hunter essentially goes straight to the top, there are clearly plenty of rooms and chambers sealed off. Shaywu infestations may be one of several contributing factors to keeping those areas off limits to all but the best hunters, and may provide pause for thought for exploration of any new discoveries by guild personnel. Much as happened to Soshi, plenty hunters and explorers may enter such places and never come back out. New Udra's diet and circumstances surrounding it are probably less dramatic. When in the upper reaches of the basin, New Udra presumably feeds mainly on the slow, pudgy and abundant Geladron, who make up for their small size by requiring little effort to catch and occurring in large groups. These may also help New Udra maintain both its overall mobility and ability to traverse the basin via cracks in the rock. Too large or too armoured prey with hard shells or skeletons would only get stuck, and we see new Udra will regurgitate bones before traversing. We also see new Udra will supplement its diet with larger items as well. As well as just a Jarakan, it could also possibly take Rompopolo, Gypsaros and Ursula as well, although the latter two at least seem to have poisonous flesh that could make them unpalatable to the Cephalopod, as much as to other monsters too. But new Udra spends most of its time in the lesser known lower reaches of the basin, and has a large strong beak for a reason. New Udra's beak is very large compared to most real cephalopods, and relative to them too features a very reduced hood, with a very hypertrophied but still robust rostrum, unlike any living cephalopod. In function, it's still probably more comparable to an octopus, still being very thick and robust, and so better designed to take high stresses for a crushing function on restrained prey, rather than quickly snapping at small prey in chases as squid do. As can happen at very large body sizes, it may also rely on sheer mass to make up for specialization for certain forces relative to body size. Whilst at depth, it may eat larger monsters and armoured ones, shearing through plate and shell with its beak, much as a real octopus does with crabs and shellfish. It's not impossible there are species of carapaceans down there to eat, but another possibility is the armoured wyverns. How interactions between new Udra and Gravios go down is unknown, but new Udra is a formidable threat, with multiple limbs of flexible muscle and a beak that could potentially crack armour. But Gravios is immune to any flames new Udra can produce, is huge and strong itself, and can provide a variety of gases that likely evolved for anti-predator defense. Such kaiju clashes in the basin may have an undetermined victor at press time. The ecology of Gravios is poorly known in the basin, with many factors like if the fire spring fallow and plenty have much effect on them as ore eaters, or if the oil silt and its effects on productivity change much too. Possibly like new Udra, Gravios may be brought to the surface by the Everforge, or rather its runoff. It's mentioned Gravios is attracted to Azuz due to the leftover ores, and in the high-quality fire springs, the slag and other leftovers may be attractive foodstuffs indeed for Gravios. Otherwise, its comparative lack of presence could also be due to it preferring the much lower levels as well. If we assume this is where Gravios breeds, explaining the lack of Basarios in the upper levels, then this would suit new Udra nicely. A Basarios is still a big chunky meal to last for several sittings, but is far less formidable than its adult morph. Basarios prefers to camouflage itself in the rocks and substrate of its environment, which seems like a successful strategy against most potential predators. But with the tentacles also doubling as sensory organs, that may even be able to taste, new Udra's limbs may be able to pick up such sensory minutiae to betray a hidden Basarios. From there, it can anchor itself on and begin to gnaw through the armour with its beak until it makes a fatal wound. Like real octopi, the combination of new Udra's beak and arms are well designed to shear through the restrained and armoured prey, but unfortunately for their victims, not with any degree of speed. A Basarios that tries to flee is all the better, to be subdued quickly with the tentacles and manipulated so new Udra can focus on the much softer underbelly. Presumably, a well-timed gas attack is a Basarios' only real hope of survival if found. Happily for Basarios, this is just speculation so far, as is much of the video, and no direct observations between the two have been observed yet. But if further investigation into the Oilwell Basin and ruins of the Eastlands continue, we may shed more light on the lives of the great cephalopods. Overall, the squids are fantastic. It is early into 6th gen to call it, but right now the two have my best newcomer award easily, and it is hard to see anything taking it from them. New Udra is a big, excellent land kraken, and whilst only receiving relatively minor differences from actual octopi, the fact it's a giant tar-covered land octopi is enough to already make it a fitting addition to the roster. It's also worth noting that the notion of the kraken and similar beasts, some of the most classic and iconic symbols of monstrous peril for assorted human cultures, are often just cephalopod but big as well. The tar aspect also ties new to Hedera as well, as is its title in the game's files. Gravios is also called Godzilla, and it is a little disappointing the turf war the two are seemingly coded to have didn't actually happen. Maybe we'll have to wait for Wild's ultimate like Legiana and Odogaron. It is interesting to hear that some form of octopus was originally conceived for 3rd gen, and an underwater fight that probably would have caused the Wii to explode. It can also be seen in some of Nakakos' concept art that it initially had some octopus ideas over cuttlefish, but now they've finally brought that original idea to life, and it is fantastic. Nu is a fun and challenging fight, admittedly one of the few in the game that can be called the latter, being my only triple card in the story playthrough. I actually tried longsword against him looking forward to the tentacle chopping, but I didn't even succeed in getting one off before death, and then swapped to Balahara's hammer and took him down. Even without the chopping, Nu is still a fresh, novel fight and just generally a lot of fun too. It strikes an intimidating figure with no clear weak point, and especially when ablaze. And there's no other way than to just wade in and figure it out for yourself. I really like that despite being so animalistic, they still manage to give Nu personality too. Most prevalently in its pin when it seems to bring you close for inspection, as if to get a better look at why this weird, small Ajarikon is causing so much trouble before burning you, or the palpable frustration in the ult move that ends the blazing period of its fight. Combine that with a great cutscene to set it up, a fantastic theme too, and spectacular ambience in the low reaches of the basin, and Nu just makes for a very exciting and refreshing experience in the context of the series. Shay Wu is a wonderful and intriguing monster. Much of the lore given here is non-canonical, as indeed my videos are, and speculate based off what's seen in-game. Whether my subterranean Shay that eats enriched monsters will be true, or close to the truth, remains to be seen whenever Wilds gets its lore book. Generally, it does give me at least vibes of something meant to live underground for the most part. In general with Shay, there's still so much mystery as to where it comes from, and how/if it lives outside of Wyveria, and hopefully these beguiling mysteries will get a little more light shed on them in future games. Fight-wise, it's immensely enjoyable, and also very reminiscent of Shogun Cyanator or Seregios, and that it's a monster really made to encourage aggression and boldness, whilst punishing caution and dodging. Shoving yourself up into Shay's beard really negates a lot of its attacks, and puts it more on the defensive as it tries to create distance to use its knife tentacles, whereas slower or more hesitant approaches just get sliced to pieces in the interim. It almost feels as if Nu was made to bait you into attacking the tentacles, and then that's maybe the worst thing you can do with Shay. Any attack that also involves its big blue mouth is also a good panic inducer. Shay also gave me my most cinematic card, when it literally nothing personal kiddoed me in its nest. It disappeared, my health bar went red, and then I turned around just in time to see the big blue mouth eat me. On that note, design-wise, Shay is very FromSofty. The whole of the ruins and their concepts are very FromSofty in general, and Shay makes a fitting addition to both it and the series, looking like a cross between an octopus and a fungal fruiting body. Also that teppanyaki chef octopus from Monsters Inc. I think too, the beard is a nice touch, as its appearance and the way it faces you give the presumably deliberately misleading impression that it's a mouth, until you actually see what the mouth is. The lack of a real face too also makes Shay a difficult to read monster, that only adds to this aspect of unpredictability. Nu gives the impression of something very deliberate and controlled, calmly holding the player or multiple Ajarikon aloft to look at them before dousing in fire, but has a clear change when it becomes enraged and becomes less focused and more destructive, with sloppier but more devastating attacks. Shay comes across as something that doesn't really have a tell, or ever really loses its cool, with perhaps its most dangerous attack being when cornered on its last legs in its nest. Or at least that's my take on things. It does also feel like the developers got wind of some of the fan response to Nurg as a predator of elders, and do a much better job this time around, properly emphasizing Shay as predators of guardians. It's already exciting to think what may come in the future for the class. Cephalopods are unique, in that, say, unlike dragons, they're very difficult to combine with other creatures. If you combine a dragon and a cat, you can successfully produce something like Teostra. But if you try to combine a cat and an octopus, you lose funding for your masters in genetics and have to swap to behavioural ecology. But also the octopus element would just overwhelm other things you try to add to it. Which isn't to say they aren't a malleable class. In the leak period, many thought that Shei-Wu was an invading, pack-hunting acrobat squid, which it isn't, but another monster could be. With social monsters, a social cephalopod is one direction to go in, as is an aerial one that uses propulsion to get around, as is a more squiddy design, as is an underwater one. With the quality of what we've got so far, the future looks bright for the class. Thanks for watching, and thanks as ever to my patrons: Bonecrusher Hyena, Toxic Wolf, Super Stuper, DJ, Samburgo, K-Sandom, Octavia of the Fifth Fleet, Nickname 3110, Kieran McCarthy, Flygon's Archives, Hooey Hooey, Jabin, The Belted Horned Warbler, Big Man Blastoise, Nathan Cross, Johnny, Oni, Tim Gojira, Teddy KGB, Waffle, Slashmaster 101, Dapperaptor, Aristocrat Mojo, Godzilla Prime 2, Original Username, Small Squid, Litten Gamer 111, Evilly, Howleth, Archosaur Queen, Tommy Choi, Jacob Wilcox, Seth Fake Last Name, Zacer, Dudekablos, and Bazugazu Bakumatsu, whose generosity helps keep the channel going. If you're interested in supporting the channel and voting on who gets to appear in future videos, a link is provided in the description for the Patreon, and any amount is always appreciated. With Shei-Wu not even having a render, and having an animation skeleton so complex it instantly causes any computer with SFM on it to explode instantly, or is my understanding of it, there are also a lot of artists to thank for this video too. First off, Vogelsinization created the excellent Shei-Wu render for this video. CJ Broskin made the great piece of Shei-Wu and Goldrathian fighting, and Shockle the piece of Shei-Wu ambushing the hunter in the ruins. You can follow CJ on social media to keep up with their original art pieces, and the same goes for Shockle too, who also has a short and surreal animation Drinky you can watch in the wait for the next video as well. Thanks to I Am the Kaiju King for gathering screenshots, and Archelosaurian for screenshots and also helping to find quotes and dialogue for the video. Thanks to both Kamen Rider Moten, T-Common Shark and Dragon Master for creating the digital artwork pieces of Udra versus the various forms of armor wyvern, as well as getting the anatomy pieces too. The links for everyone's social media is provided in the description, so be sure to check them all out too. I'm glad many enjoyed the sacred video, and yes, happily the controls were changed before I even published it. Gaijin Hunter's video was indeed useful. It's also good to see a lot of new subscribers and patrons too with the release of Wilds. Since its release, I have been asked quite a bit on whether I intend to cover Arkfeld / the Guardian concept / give thoughts on the game in general too. I do plan to sprinkle at least some of that through the debrief and opinion sections of the analysis videos. But I also think Wilds has probably given enough for its own broader topics videos overall, which will probably cover all of what you'd likely want to know from me. For Spec Evo shorts as well, I think this may as well double as a land squid episode, as quite a few had suggested that as well. I'd only really be repeating what I put here. Speaking of other things you may want to know from me, after the landslide victory for the Cephalopods won them the first large monster video, the next one in the lineup will be